The second to last army in the world never ceases to amaze the world with its military technologies. No way.
Ha 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 ha. Wow, this is firewood with them. I get it. It protects against wooden bullets.
The advanced solutions of the Russian military-industrial complex paired with highly trained fighters often look exactly like this in practice.
Let's figure out what needs to be done.
But the bunker grandpa seems oblivious to who and what is actually defending his delusional ideas on the front. Rocket launchers on UAZ vehicles, evacuation of the wounded on motorcycles, advanced squads of cripples on walkers, and wooden plates in bulletproof vests. These are the current realities on the front for the Russian army. We will talk about them in Arsenal. In attempts to plagiarize Ukrainian unity, many charitable organizations have sprung up in Russia since the beginning of the war. However, they managed to steal the idea, but not the essence itself. Because for such volunteer deliveries to the front in Ukraine, one would simply be imprisoned. But in Russia, this is the norm.
What kind of plate is this? Let's take a look. Some kind of Chinese one. Yeah, probably. Could it be Kevlar? No. Subtitles made by Dimitrorzak. Holy crap! Firewood with you. I got it. It protects against wooden bullets.
We are conducting these developments. We are ready to start production. We have already, in principle, so to speak, given the appropriate directive to the industry.
Wood in the Russian Federation is generally a favorite material for everything. It grows by itself. The main task is to cut it down and carve whatever your heart desires. Want extra protection for tanks? Want to reinforce bridges for armored vehicles? After all, building from sticks and, well, you get it. In Russia, it's a widespread tradition.
I didn't even know such technologies existed on bridges. Home sealant. As for what's here, I'll keep quiet. And all of this is literally supported on wooden planks.
But a bridge on planks is far from the only thing a Russian person can come up with out of desperation.
Belgorod region. A local resident painted BNR on the roof. And the roof, as you can see, is still intact. Well, what else is there to do? If there's no air defense, at least let them hand out Ukrainian flags to the residents.
But the Russian leadership hands out crutches so that the second army in the world can continue fighting for the dacha in Gelendzhik and Putin's billions. After all, losing limbs for a Russian soldier is just part of the hardships of military service.
With crutches, with sticks. Here's a guy without a leg at all on crutches ahead of me. With a cane.
This is a very huge advantage that our armed forces have. I think that no one else can act like this today.
Doctors and those in the rear are at a loss because the few who have been lucky enough to survive and receive treatment are doing everything they can to extend their medical leave. But they encounter very sensitive doctors there.
A lot of wounded have passed through my hands. Even when I have a concussion, and I know how to easily check for this concussion just once or twice. No, you go to the front line. Please help, save. Please. Well, not me. What can I do? What can I do for you?
And the desire not to return is quite justified. If we set aside the fact of the meat grinder of war, the frontline realities of the soldiers are also complemented by such vivid experiences. We collect drinking water. There are drops on the ceiling. And accordingly, into the jar. Sometimes we get luckier with water, then problems arise with food.
In the room, there. If there's food, you eat. If not, you don't. That's it. Well, at least there's a stream flowing. You can at least get some water. Otherwise, nowhere. Survive however you can, either from hunger or from a bullet. That's all.
Even if the stars align and the provisions do arrive, that's still no reason to rejoice. We sit down to eat. There's something called United Russia. The situation with weapon supplies is no better, as equipment from the same era as the 1960s canned meat is sent to the front.
The heavy Soviet tank Joseph Stalin II, better known as IS-2, became one of the symbols of victory in the Great Patriotic War.
Behind me, right here. Here it is, the little cannon. In short, when it was made, my grandfather was 10 years old, just for a moment.
And here, the same principle works as with people. Become disabled. They patch you up and back to battle. As you can see, there's practically nothing visible for the driver mechanic. Meanwhile, the turret is jammed. It has no shells and doesn't fire at all. And really, what is there to shoot with here? This is a Russian T-62M, which was made back in the 60s. Now it has no armor, no shells, and was used for transporting personnel. Meanwhile, the crew was taken prisoner here. Meanwhile, as you can see, the dynamic protection it has is empty. The ammunition is missing, the gun is jammed, the turret is jammed. It was simply used as a taxi. So the Kulibins have to improvise on the fly. Doesn't fit in the grad? No problem. We'll shove it into a homemade pipe on a tripod. Not enough armor? Also not a problem. A launch block for S-8 air missiles can be easily mounted for firing on a UAZ vehicle.
Volley, volley, volley.
And it doesn't matter that aimed fire is impossible under such conditions. It flew somewhere, and that's fine.
Our armed forces are becoming so capable and so ready to conduct, to use modern means of armed struggle to an extent that no other army in the world is prepared for or can do.
Here's our unit, Storm. Damn, what troubles we've gotten ourselves into. Did you give your word or something? How is it normal? Help people.
Meanwhile, attempts to often produce something worthwhile turn into isolated cases for PR on Russian TV.
To complete the image of the soldier of the future, really, only an exoskeleton is missing. That's the kind of wrap the guys came up with. Backpack. Let's go for a run. Honestly, I'm not much of a runner even without a backpack. But in principle, it's possible. And you're ahead of the drone. You can definitely go for a run. Well, we just checked. It works for 200 meters.
But these 200 meters become almost the only ones on the front covered by unparalleled developments. Where the correspondent's foot has not stepped, everything remains the same.
A kamikaze worked on us. The kamikaze worked. There's a heavy guy, his leg got detached. The guys ran over there dragging him to the quad. The quad worked on us.
But what is encountered everywhere in the Russian army is money scams, to use the words of their own supreme commander.
Until February 7th, we were in the LNR, Kremlin, Rubizhna. And from February 7th, we were transferred to the Belgorod region, Russian Federation. After being transferred to the Belgorod region, they stopped paying us combat pay, even though our losses in the Belgorod region are many times greater than in the LNR.
For not evading an enemy shell but surviving, you also need to be paid in order to...
And the amount is quite substantial. The first case regarding the Euro vehicle, they extorted 150,000 from it. The second time they demanded either 100,000 or 1,300,000.
These are the realities for heroes of the special military operation, fighting for unclear reasons, using their grandfather's equipment with the same slogans, their brainwashed minds don't realize they themselves, though, have become the fascists they intended to fight against. But perhaps how much they are needed by their motherland can best be explained to them by the Russian command through its supplies, support, provisioning, and orders. Did you like this video? Then don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel, so you don't miss new episodes of Arsenal. Only here awaits you a true celebration.
The Russians boasted about their seemingly never-ending supply of missiles.
After the SPN receives a signal of a missile attack, hundreds of our missiles are in the air from our side. It is impossible to stop them.
The Russians were particularly proud of their stockpile of S-300s. They were counted in the thousands. Such a quantity was indeed intimidating. But then a full-scale war began, and as a result, the Russians heard explosions. These frames capture explosions at a warehouse in the Tver region. Drones arrived there on the night of September 18th. These warehouses could have stored ammunition for Grads, S-300s, S-400s, as well as ballistic missiles for Iskander, and even a stock of North Korean KN-23s. This news is undoubtedly pleasant, but we still have a fly in the ointment for you. More missiles could have been delivered to Russia, this time Iranian ones. This was reported by the global media the day before. Allegedly, Tehran delivered 220 Fajr 360 missiles to the Russians via the Caspian Sea. And this raised many questions. For example, why do the Russians need Iranian missiles if they have their own? Could it be that the Russian Federation has finally encountered a production problem? Or is this all untrue? The Russians have long been begging for missiles from their militant friends. In September of last year, the then Russian Defense Minister Shoigu even visited Iran and persistently showed interest in local military developments. If the media speculations are correct, then the Iranians have indeed yielded, and the Russians received, as we mentioned, the Fajr 360. This is a ballistic missile. It was developed as a smaller version of the Fateh 110. This is the missile that the Russians initially wanted. As for the characteristics of the Fajr 360, its flight speed is 4 Mach. The launch mass is almost 800 kilograms, and the warhead weight is 150 kilograms. And the flight range is up to 120 kilometers. Not to say that it's a lot. However, it might be very accurate, and again a miss. The Iranians claim that the accuracy of the Fajr 360 missile is about 30 meters from the target. But the same Iranians claimed that the Emad missiles had an error margin of 50 meters. However, after the April attack by Tehran on Israel, experts concluded that the actual error margin is at least a kilometer. The situation with the Fajr 360 is unlikely to be different. But it's too early to celebrate. After all, it seems that the Russians need these missiles, not for their accuracy.
Russia wants to acquire this system to reduce the strain on its own stockpile of short-range mobile ballistic missiles, especially systems like the Iskander.
But all this is on the condition that the missiles have indeed been transferred. But would Iran take such a risk? That's a big question.
The lack of reaction from key players in the Middle East, namely the State of Israel, and other regional powers, suggests that the possible transfer of missile technology from Iran did not take place. I will explain what this is about. At one time in November 2022, when the first information about the possible transfer of ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation appeared. It was then referred to as Fateh, with a range of 300 and 700 kilometers. The head of Israel's National Security Council stated at a forum in Bahrain that if Iran transfers ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation, Israel would be ready to supply high-precision ballistic missiles to Ukraine. The reaction was immediate. Currently, there is no reaction from the official representatives of the State of Israel.
Experts are also puzzled by the reported number of missiles.
220 units, which, according to Western media, were unloaded in accordance with a ship that arrived at a Russian port and then transported to the Shalukov test site in the Astrakhan region. Accordingly, the question arises, why would the Russians buy missiles, only to transport them to a test site? The explanations were that the Russian Federation supposedly intends to test the tactical and technical characteristics of Iranian missiles. However, this information is clearly contradicted by other reports that several dozen Russian officers have undergone training directly on Iranian territory.
As unpleasant as it may sound, the Russians have missiles, the same S-300s which the occupiers use daily to strike Ukrainian territory. Compared to the S-300, the FAZ-360 is not impressive. The Russian missile flies up to a distance of 250 kilometers, which is twice as far as the Iranian one, and the number of such missiles is estimated to be approximately 7,000 units. Plus, they continue to be manufactured in factories.
There are production capabilities not only for the S-300, but also for other means of destruction. As for the entire range, this includes Iskanders, Kinsals, and accordingly, other means of destruction. The S-300 accounts for about 30 to 35% of the missiles that the Russian Federation launches over Ukrainian territory.
But while the Russians managed to continue manufacturing missiles, the production of launchers for the same S-300 has stalled.
The Russians have problems with the S-300A and S-400 launchers. According to Finnish sources, the Russian Federation was forced to remove complexes from covering the airspace of the Leningrad region. And this is essentially the western border, the borders with NATO countries. This is scientific evidence that the number of launchers themselves is limited. I would like to remind you that in 2018, relevant intergovernmental agreements on military technical cooperation were concluded. Specifically, the transfer of S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems from the Russian Federation to the Indian side. As of today, the Russian Federation has announced the extension of this agreement until 2026-2028. And this is an international contract. This is a corresponding loss of positions in the global arms market. Therefore, there is no basis to talk about hundreds of S-300, S-400 launchers, even based on this fact. That is, there are likely only a few dozen of them.
So, in theory, the armed forces of Ukraine could destroy these few dozen S-300 complexes, or at least significantly reduce their number. And then the Russians will indeed likely be forced to ask for help from their few allies. Iran, it seems, will not be able to lend a hand to their terrorist friends. There are also the Belarusians with their Polonais, but there's a very important nuance. The Belarusians developed their MLRS together with China. If it comes to transferring the systems, the final word will belong to China.
The Polonaise MLRS is accordingly a joint Belarusian-Chinese production. It is a 301mm system adapted to the Belarusian wheeled chassis MZKT 7930. For the multifunctional Chinese missile system, the firing range of the complex, depending on the modification, can range from 200 to 300 kilometers. But without Beijing's consent, Minsk will not transfer the corresponding Polonaise MLRS to the Russian Federation.
The only option for the Russians is their friends from North Korea. Kim Jong-un will come to Putin's aid in a difficult moment. Let's be honest, he has already come. But the question of how many we are talking about remains open. Therefore, the only option here is to continue striking Russian depots, and remember that the Russians don't have that many S-300 systems. And when there are even fewer, we will definitely tell you about it and show you. In the meantime, like this video. Comment on which weaponry you'd like to hear an analysis of, and subscribe to our new Arsenal channel. The link is in the details under the video.
Having lost a third of the Black Sea Fleet, Russia continues to churn out new targets for Ukrainian anti-ship weapons. This year, Putin's military-industrial complex plans to sign a contract for the construction of 2 large landing ships and use them to try to capture Ukraine again.
From the very beginning, they planned for 6, but again, these 6 ships will not save them.
Meanwhile, even with 2 such ships already today, the Russians are completely unable to use them as intended, and looking ahead are unlikely to ever be able to use them as originally designed by the engineers.
The concept of how they conduct an amphibious operation is already outdated.
Russia's large landing ships. How many are currently left? How are they dangerous for Ukraine? How many more of these vessels, so does the Kremlin plan to assemble, and what ships has Putin ordered to be built this year? This is what we'll discuss today in Arsenal. Evidently, after calculating their losses at sea, the Kremlin decided that what they lack the most are large landing ships. It became known that this year the Russian defense industry plans to sign a contract for the construction of 2 ships of Project Da Ilosampin 11. Laid down in the year 2004, the very first ship of this project was Ivan Gren, which took a whole 14 years to build in total. During its trials, the ship demonstrated amazingly terrifying stability and delighted with more than 40 design defects. But there was no more time to delay, and the large landing ship was launched, as it was. The second large landing ship of this series, Petr Mogunov, seemingly should have been built taking into account the mistakes of its predecessor. However, the attempt to fix them resulted in new problems. It underwent trials for more than a year and was only handed over to the Russian Navy at the end of 2019.
Petr Mogunov from the Northern Fleet came to us about 2.5 years ago. Now, it's stationed hidden in Novorossiysk. They're afraid that we might also hit it.
This ship was supposed to land troops in Ukraine at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. It was the one that bobbed around for several weeks during a storm near Odessa and soon sailed away without completing its mission. Later, the Russians called Petr Mogunov a miracle weapon in the matter of mine warfare, effectively turning a multi-purpose ship into a mere platform for transporting mines.
It is one of the most, well, probably one of the most capacious ships on which the largest number of naval mines can be placed and deployed in some area for defensive minefields.
It is worth remembering that in Russia, the construction of 2 more ships of Project 11-17-11 is ongoing. Vladimir Andreev and Vasily Trushin, which began back in 2019. It is known that their designers decided to make some changes. At the very least, the displacement has been increased by 1.5 tons. Consequently, the ship itself will also become larger. According to expert assessments, this is most likely due to the fact that additional air defense systems and possibly anti-drone installations will be mounted on the decks.
I don't see any other, and therefore, differences there. There, on the deck, there is a 16-ton crane that loads lifeboats and various high-speed boats onto the ship. There, 2 K-29 helicopters can be used. This is an old Soviet helicopter, an attack type, quite heavy, or 1 K-52 helicopter. It can take on board that is 13 60-ton tanks. So in principle, well, practically, a tank company, practically. Additionally, 36 armored personnel carriers and combat vehicles, or that is either 30 vehicles or 300 Marines.
However, the principle of application and the capabilities as a whole have remained unchanged.
It's a fairly large ship. It can transport a Marine battalion. There you go. It's somewhat, well, it has an interesting design, but its system, the landing system, the concept remained the same, Soviet. That is, the ship approaches the shore, opens the ramp, and the landing force disembarks.
And with this approach, experts say, continuing the construction of such ships is a utopia. Simply put, no one fights like that anymore. In modern warfare, approaching the shore for a landing is practically impossible, as demonstrated in the year US 2022.
In order to land troops in Odessa, you need to capture Nikolaev and cut off the Kyiv-Odessa road and connect, have the Russians link up with Transnistria. Only then does a landing operation makes sense.
The paradox is that the Russians themselves are beginning to understand this. For example, the BDK Ivan Gren, the lead ship of this project, is used by Russia not for combat missions, but for staged exhibitions of fake trophies from Ukraine.
Also, take note, comments, children. Here, that is everything. So, it all starts very early. Here, you see, Russians tied up to DNR, killed, vodka, cigarettes.
And now the most interesting part. Having 2 ships without the possibility of their rational use, with 2 more under construction. This year, Russia plans to sign a contract for the construction of 2 more ships of Project 11.
From the very beginning, they planned for 6, but again, these 6 ships won't save them against the backdrop of the total obsolescence of the fleet and landing ships. Plus, we need to add that we have, destroyed a significant part of them.
There are 2 immediate answers to the obvious question, why? Either the Kremlin is still planning a possible landing in Odessa after successes on land out as corresponding information has been received, or they plan to use the ships in another region.
Most likely due to the budget, due to sanctions, their construction was halted. Now, as I understand it, they want to complete a couple more ships. They are already, in fact, under construction. For quite a long time, they have wanted to build them and send them to TUAPs.
One thing remains certain today. The usual scheme of the Russian military-industrial complex, where combat-ready equipment was purchased abroad and the military budget was heavily embezzled, producing a few non-analogous projects per decade to justify its existence in those times, have faded into oblivion. Today, everything that Putin can use for war has to be assembled by the Russians themselves.
After the loss of these ships during the war, against Ukraine, they realized that they might end up without any ships at all. And no one in Europe is going to sell them landing ships now. That's why they are building these ships.
Ukraine is also preparing for these constructions. Whether our special services will allow the construction to be completed is an open question, as unexpected incidents have not been ruled out. But even if the ships are launched and brought into the Black Sea basin, we will definitely have something to respond with.
Maritime drones, airborne cruise missiles will be complemented by the F-16. The F-16s can work very effectively against them.
Did you like this video? Then don't forget to give it a like and write in the comments about which other weapons you'd like to learn more. And most importantly, subscribe to our new Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.